Ezran is the only son of King Harrow and Queen Sarai. Though Callum is his half-brother, Callum isn't related to the king by blood, whereas Ezran is. So Ezran, despite being younger than Callum, ascends to the throne after the sudden and unexpected death of King Harrow. This is a problem, as Ezran is still a small child at the time of Harrow's untimely death. Now, Ezran could have a regent, someone who rules for him until he is of age, but it is perhaps wise that he does not try to do this, as these are, after all, very unstable times. The kingdom of Catalis finds itself opposed by Viren, formerly the closest advisor of King Harrow. The king's court is thus not stable, and not everyone is as they seem. I can't help but think this is a major reason why Ezran wants to try to rule himself, instead of having someone else rule in his stead. This is admirable, and we should congratulate him for his courage, but let us not forget that he is still only a child. Though he is caring and compassionate and thoughtful, there is a definite limit to his wisdom, and this bodes ill for the kingdom as a whole. Harrow, the king, has faith in his son Ezran. In the letter that Harrow wrote the two sons, Callum and Ezran, before Harrow's untimely death, Harrow said that he wants his sons to be better than him. He doesn't want his sons to fall into the same trap that befell him. Though Harrow is tender and empathetic, he also has a more morally questionable side. A streak of cruelty, perhaps. I really do respect and commend the Dragon Prince for not ignoring or downplaying the side of Harrow. We all know the common trope about the good-hearted king who's tricked by one of his scheming advisors, but the Dragon Prince really complicates that dynamic. For one, the scheming advisor, Viren, is not just a cold-hearted propagandist. He does some horrible things, and his motives are perhaps twisted by anger and bitterness, but he does have a strong moral sense. When he sees injustice, he fights it. He refuses to tolerate it. And that bitterness and resentment of what he perceives as injustice is likely a large part of why he was so close to Harrow in the first place. However, even if we are to see Viren as a darker version of the scheming advisor, however, it's not like Harrow is completely opposed to this darkness. It's not like he's completely innocent of it. He shares some of Viren's vices, if we are to call them vices. And this is something the traditional king advisor dynamic does not really consider. The typical version of this dynamic is, again, the king being led astray by this manipulative advisor, but one has to wonder why the king chose this advisor in the first place. There are, in my mind, two major options. Number one, the king is just a complete moron who can't see 2 feet in front of his face and cannot notice that someone is very obviously conniving against the best interests of the kingdom. The second, and to me more interesting answer to this question, is that the king is not wholly opposed to the values of the advisor, and this is the tact the Dragon Prince takes. Yes, when compared to Harrow, Viren is much more willing to seek violent answers to the problems the kingdom faces, but if Harrow had been completely opposed to Viren's tendencies, Harrow would have cut ties with him a long time ago. The truth is that even though Harrow presents this very noble appearance, he has been prone to falling prey to Viren's mode of thinking, as we see in my all-time favorite episode of this show, episode 306, Thunderfall. At first, Harrow is very hesitant and anxious about agreeing to go along with Viren's plan to kill the dragon Thunderavazandam as revenge for what Thunderavazandam did to Harrow's wife Sarai, but Viren ultimately doesn't have to push that hard. Harrow breaks, he relents. He has that thirst for revenge in him too. Now, of course, there's a way the show could have played this wherein Harrow is entirely blameless, where he's nothing but an innocent victim of Viren's persuasion. Viren is very smart, and he knows exactly what appeal to make to someone to really get under their skin and convince them to take Viren's side. But this is not exactly what happens between Harrow and Viren in Thunderfall. Does Viren take advantage of him to a certain extent? I'd say so. But that's not the whole picture. Harrow is not entirely innocent. He is susceptible to these passions and desires for violence, just like Viren. Throughout the episode, Harrow has several good opportunities to renounce his quest and turn away from Viren, but each time he can't do it. Each time he recommits to Viren. After the deed is over, he regrets it, but by then it's too late. You can't take something like that back. He implores his children, Ezran, his biological son, and Callum, his stepson, to not succumb to violence, to not succumb to the thirst for revenge, and instead to try and transcend that. He doesn't want their hearts to be swayed by warmongering, and this is a noble intention, and Ezran, when he becomes the king, tries desperately to follow through on that intention and be the king that Harrow wants him to be. But does that necessarily make him a good king? From one perspective, he's just a weak king. Now, it's easy to hate Prince Kasif, who berates Ezran ruthlessly for not wanting to go to war against the elves, but if you put yourself in Kasif's position, it's kind of easy to sympathize with him. Humans, flatly speaking, are not treated well in this society. They are despised by the elves to the extent that the elves banished humanity from an entire half of the continent just because humanity wanted to use dark magic. A magic, I must say, they made up because they don't have the same access to the primal sources that the elves do. Also, the half of the land that humans are left with is not the better half, if we judge by the food shortage that led Harrow and Sarai to make the campaign into Xadia that eventually led to Sarai's death at the hands of Thunderavazandam. Now, this does not necessarily mean we can condone the behavior of humans who want to wage war on the elves, but we can at least understand that behavior. It's born out of desperation and powerlessness. Now that the elves have assassinated the wise, tender-hearted, good King Harrow, the idea of trying to seek peace with the elves just seems grotesque in a way. Does an unjust peace really deserve to be called peace? Are you really supposed to make peace with the people who are stomping on your neck? There's not an easy answer to any of these questions. I don't have an easy answer to give y'all. But these are questions that should be considered, and they shouldn't just be swept aside because humanity is resorting to violence. And Ezran's refusal to even consider the idea of going to war, while it does come from good intentions, ultimately portrays him in a way as unwilling to actually look at the real material conditions humans are facing. I mean, the other human kingdoms are right. The war has already started, trying to make peace at this point, when the elves have already assassinated the leader of Katalis. Might not be the best decision long term. Now, does this justify Prince Kasif leading all of the other human kingdoms in a war against Katalis just because Katalis refuses to wage war on Xadia? Well, no, not necessarily. But you can understand the anger of the people in the human kingdoms. So many people are dying. Brothers, sisters, parents, children. Now, you may not want war, and it's understandable and admirable that you don't want war, but if your refusal to fight causes the deaths of arguably more people than would have died if you had chosen to fight in the war, is your decision to try and seek peace really that admirable? I don't know. Now, Ezran's response to the threat of violence on his own kingdom is exceedingly strange and idiosyncratic. Not wanting to fight Xadia, but knowing the combined force of all the other human kingdoms could very easily overwhelm Katalis, he deigns to release Viren from prison, allow Viren to become the ruler of Katalis, and then allow himself, Ezran, to be locked up in prison. This is ultimately a disastrous decision, as it allows Viren, with the aid of the Star-Touch elf Eryth, to not only lead the combined armies of humanity in battle against Xadia, but also to transform those armies into dark magic zombies without a brain or a heart or a soul. Now, sure, we have a happy ending at the end of Season 3, everything works out alright in the end, but that ending does feel a little perfunctory to me. There are so many questions left unanswered. Is this really the best Ezran could have done? If Ezran had buckled under pressure and declared war on Xadia, Viren would never have been released from prison, and he would not be such a significant threat in this show. And also, the armies of Katalis and the other human kingdoms would not have been turned into dark magic zombies, which is a point we should really consider. The threat Eryth, our ultimate villain, poses to the world would ultimately have been significantly lessened. Now, that does not necessarily mean Ezran should have declared war on Xadia, but it does mean that his Pollyanna-ish yearning to seek peace at all costs might not always be the wisest decision for himself or his kingdom. A morally righteous decision, as Harrow knew very well, but what Harrow also understood, and what I'm not sure Ezran does, is that even if you do desire to make peace, it's a decision that should be considered in the context of the actual material conditions you're facing. You're not a Kantian up in this philosophy world making decisions outside of their consequences. When you're a king, that can lead to the suffering and even the death of a lot of people. Now, Ezran is not a bad king, and I don't know if I even necessarily blame him for what ended up happening. He is still a child, after all. But since Ezran's actions ultimately led to more conflict than they avoided, I'm not sure one can properly call Ezran a good king. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching The Dragon Prince. It is a lovely, comfortable, yet challenging show. It's very beautiful, very thoughtful, and I can't wait to see where they go with it in the next couple seasons, whenever we get those. It's been a while, but let's hope those other seasons are on the way. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.